Story 1. Prologue. The Forgotten Thread. In the beginning, the world was bound by 5 forces, each one a thread in the vast tapestry of existence. Flame, tide, gale, stone. In essence, these were the prime threads, elements that shaped life, governed the land, and empowered those who could bend them to their will. But there was a 6th thread, one lost to time, buried beneath the weight of fear and history. Shadow. Where the other threads created and sustained, shadow twisted and concealed. It wove through the cracks of the world, unseen by most. A power too dangerous and unpredictable to be wielded freely. It was said that those who touched it were cursed, forever bound to the darkness they sought to control. And so, the ancient weavers cast it aside, erasing its teachings from their scrolls, forbidding its practice under penalty of death. Yet the shadows never truly vanished. They lurked in forgotten corners of the world, waiting for the right moment, the right person, to reclaim them. In the capital city of Lysara, among the grand halls of the Flame Guild, a young weaver named Lyra was beginning to hear whispers of this forgotten thread. She was born into a family of flame weavers, destined to follow the path of fire like those before her, but even as a child, she had felt something pulling at her, a quiet presence lurking at the edges of her mind, a shadow she couldn't explain. Now, as tensions rise between the guilds and a strange darkness stirs beneath the surface of the kingdom, the lost thread is beginning to awaken, and soon it will call to her, for some threads cannot be cut. Some powers, once touched, changed the world forever. Lyra's journey would not be one of fire alone, it would be one of light and shadow, and the balance between them would determine not only her fate, but the fate of the world itself. But balance, she would soon learn, comes at a price. Chapter 1. The Flame and the Shadow. Lyra felt the heat pulsing beneath her palms, a familiar hum of energy that surged from the core of her being. She stood on the sun-baked training grounds of the Flame Guild, surrounded by the low crackle of distant fires. The other apprentices had already left for the evening, but Lyra couldn't tear herself away. Not today. With a deep breath, she focused on the flickering flame dancing atop her hand. It was small now, a simple spark of fire bending to her will, but it wasn't enough. Master Velos always said fire was a reflection of the soul, fierce, unruly, and untamable, unless you mastered your own emotions. Control was the key. Lyra clenched her fist, and the flame obeyed, swelling into a roaring blaze. She smiled at the feeling of power surging through her veins. But as the fire grew, so did the familiar knot of fear in her chest. Control was the key, but losing it, that's when things got dangerous. Steady, she whispered to herself. Keep it steady. Her hand shook slightly, but she held the blaze in place, forcing it to shrink and grow at her command. Sweat beaded on her forehead as the heat intensified. The sun was dipping below the horizon now, casting long shadows across the training ground. Then, it happened. The flame in her palm flickered, sputtered, and went out. Darkness swallowed the space around her. Lyra gasped and staggered back, blinking in confusion. In its place, a chill ran down her spine, as if the warmth of her fire had been replaced by something else. From the ground, shadows began to shift. They writhed unnaturally, curling and bending like liquid, creeping toward her feet. The temperature around her dropped, and Lyra's breath caught in her throat. "What?" she muttered, eyes wide as the shadows grew larger, darker, more real. Suddenly, they coiled around her ankles, slithering up her legs with cold intent. Panic surged. She tried to summon her flames again. Her natural defense, but nothing came. The fire that always answered her call flickered weakly at her fingertips. Barely a spark. She was left in silence, surrounded by moving darkness. "Focus!" she shouted at herself, but her voice wavered. The shadows, ever present, pressed closer, as if they were drawn to the fear coursing through her. Then, just as she was about to scream, a voice cut through the silence. "Oh, easy now!" A figure stepped from the shadows, moving as if he had been a part of them all along. He was tall, cloaked in black, with pale, piercing eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. Lyra froze. There was something about him that made the hair on the back of her neck stand on end. "You're not losing control," the man said softly, his voice calm but firm. "You're awakening, and that—" Lyra's heart pounded in her chest as she stared at him, trying to understand. "Awakening? What are you talking about? Who are you?" The man gave a small, knowing smile. "I'm someone who understands what you're going through. You're not just a flame weaver, Lyra. You've touched something much deeper, something most people don't even know exists." Lyra swallowed hard, trying to force her voice to remain steady. "I don't understand." The man crouched down, his hand brushing the shadowy tendrils that still clung to her legs. "These shadows, they aren't an accident. They're part of you now, whether you like it or not. You've started to unlock a power beyond the prime threads, something forgotten by the guilds long ago." Lyra's mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was saying. She'd trained all her life as a flame weaver. She had spent years learning to control fire, to master the element that ran through her blood. But this was something else entirely. "Shadow weaving," the man continued, as if reading her thoughts. "An ancient art, long forbidden. It was once practiced by only a select few, those who understood the balance between light and dark, flame and shadow. You've been chosen." "Chosen? Lyra spat, yanking her legs away from the shadow's grip. I didn't ask for this. The man tilted his head slightly. Few ever do. Lyra's chest tightened. She had always felt different, always struggled to keep her flame in check, as if something inside her was pulling in the opposite direction. Now, staring at the dark tendrils that still curled in the corners of the training ground, she wondered if she had been fighting the wrong battle all along. Why me? She asked, her voice a whisper. The man straightened, his eyes never leaving hers. That's for you to discover, but know this, Lyra. Shadow weaving is not something you can run from. It will follow you, whether you choose to embrace it or not. And the world, especially the guilds, will fear you for it. Fear. The word sent a shiver through her. She was no stranger to fear. Every flame weaver was taught to respect the destructive power of their element, to fear losing control. But this was something more. What do you want from me? She asked. The man smiled again, but this time, there was something darker behind it. I want to help you. The question is, are you ready to accept that help? Lyra looked at the shadows around her, felt the pull of something deeper, something that both terrified and intrigued her. She had always believed fire was her destiny, that it was her path to power. But now, standing on the edge of something new, she wasn't so sure. Her hands trembled as she took a step forward. Teach me. The man's smile widened, and with a wave of his hand, the shadows receded, leaving the training ground in silence. Very well, but remember, once you walk this path, there is no turning back. Lyra nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. She had always been searching for control, for mastery over the fire that burned within her, but now, she realized, she would have to master something far more dangerous, her own shadow, and the journey had only just begun. Chapter 2. The Hidden Path. Lyra's footsteps echoed softly through the narrow halls of the Flame Guild's dormitories. She had spent the entire night tossing and turning, haunted by the events of the evening before. The shadows, the strange man, the revelation that she was something more than just a flame weaver. It all gnawed at her thoughts. She hadn't told anyone. Who would believe her? She could barely believe it herself. The dawn light filtered through the high windows, casting long slivers of gold along the stone floors. She kept her head down, avoiding the eyes of the other apprentices as they bustled past, each preparing for another day of training. Everything felt different now, out of place, as though the familiar routines of the guild had become foreign overnight. But there was no turning back. The man had said as much, and though part of her was still reeling, she knew one thing for certain. She had to understand this new power, or it would consume her. As she made her way toward the guild's library, a voice called from behind her. Lyra! She stiffened, recognizing the voice immediately. It was Arden, her closest friend, and one of the most promising apprentices in the guild. His sharp features and confident stride were unmistakable, even when she wasn't in the mood to face him. He jogged up to her side, his blue eyes filled with the usual enthusiasm. Hey, I didn't see you at the morning warm-ups. Everything all right? He asked, a hint of concern in his voice. Lyra forced a smile, trying to keep her unease from showing. Yeah, just needed some time to think. Arden tilted his head, studying her for a moment. You're not skipping training, are you? You know Master Velos will have your head if you miss another session. I won't, Lyra said quickly. A little too quickly. I just need to check something in the library first. I'll be there soon. Arden raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. All right, just don't stay cooped up in that dusty place for too long. You'll go mad before you find whatever it is you're looking for. She nodded, relieved that he didn't ask more questions. Arden gave her a final grin before heading off toward the training grounds, leaving Lyra alone once again. As soon as he was out of sight, she picked up her pace, her heart pounding. The library was vast, a sprawling maze of shelves stacked with ancient tomes and scrolls, each one containing the secrets of the Flame Guild's history. But Lyra wasn't interested in fire today. She needed answers about the shadows, and she had no idea where to begin. The Guild's teachings never mentioned anything about shadow weaving, let alone how to control it. She slipped between the towering shelves, heading toward the back of the library where the older, less visited texts were kept. The air grew colder as she ventured deeper, the quiet pressing in around her. At last, she reached the farthest corner, where the scrolls were worn and brittle with age. This part of the library was practically forgotten, just like the power she was trying to uncover. Her fingers skimmed over the spines of the books, searching for anything that could help. She wasn't even sure what she was looking for. Shadow weaving, forgotten threads, ancient magic. The words swirled in her mind, but nothing seemed right. She was about to give up when she spotted a slim, black-bound book tucked away behind a row of larger volumes. Chapter 3, Whispers in the Dark. Lyra pulled the black-bound book from the shelf, dust clouding the air as she did so. The cover was plain, with no title or markings to indicate its contents. She ran her fingers over the rough leather, feeling a strange pull from within its pages. Something about it felt ancient, secret, as if it had been hidden away for a reason. Taking a deep breath, she opened the book. The pages were yellowed and cracked at the edges, but the ink remained dark and clear. The first few pages were filled with intricate diagrams, symbols she didn't recognize, swirling patterns that seemed to shift if she stared at them too long. And then, she saw it. A single word scrawled at the top of the next page, in bold, slanted letters. Umbra. Her heart skipped a beat. She had heard the term only in whispers. passed around by apprentices who dared speak of forbidden magics. Umbra, the ancient art of shadow weaving, was a power lost to time, dangerous, corrupting, and according to the guild, best left forgotten. The Flame Guild had never officially spoken of it, but the rumors were clear. Those who tried to harness shadows often lost themselves to it. Lyra hesitated, her fingers hovering over the page. Was this what she had been searching for? Or was she about to step into something far more dangerous than she could handle? You've started to unlock a power beyond the prime thread. The man's voice from the night before echoed in her mind. He had known about the shadows. He had spoken of an ancient power that had been sealed away, just like this. If he had been telling the truth, this book might hold the answers she needed. Answers no one in the guild would willingly give her. She turned the page and began to read. The Umbra thread is not born from chaos, but from balance. Where the prime threads weave life and form, Umbra bends and reflects. It is the unseen current. The tether between the light and the dark, the flame and the void. To wield it is to understand the nature of all things, that the world is not merely composed of elements, but of their shadows, their echoes. Lyra's eyes widened as she continued to scan the page. It spoke of a force that balanced the elements, one that wasn't tied to fire, water, air, or earth, but something deeper, a force that existed in the spaces between them, in the places where light didn't reach. The more she read, the more she realized how little she truly understood of the world she had been raised in. The guilds had only taught her part of the truth. She flipped through the pages, her mind racing. Diagrams showed figures manipulating shadows, bending them to their will in ways that seemed impossible. Another passage caught her eye. To control the Umbra thread is to walk the line between creation and destruction. Fire consumes, water shapes, air moves, and earth grounds. But the shadow? The shadow reflects. It is neither creation nor destruction. It is possibility. But beware, for it is also temptation. To wield the shadows, without understanding them, is to risk losing oneself. The words sent a chill down her spine. It sounded like a warning, but she couldn't turn back now. She had already felt the shadows respond to her the night before, felt their cold touch as they coiled around her. If she didn't learn how to control them, they might overtake her completely. Lyra! A voice, barely more than a whisper, echoed through the quiet library. Lyra's breath caught, her head snapping up. She glanced around, but the room was empty, the shelves looming silent in the dim light. Lyra? This time, it was clearer. A low murmur coming from the shadows themselves. She clenched the book tighter, her pulse quickening. The voice was familiar, like a distant memory just out of reach. She stood up, the book still in her hand, and scanned the room. Something was here, hidden in the darkness between the shelves. Slowly, she stepped away from the table, her eyes straining to see into the corners of the room where the light faded into shadow. The voice grew softer, beckoning her toward the back of the library, where the shadows seemed to deepen unnaturally. As she neared the far wall, she noticed a faint outline, a doorway she had never seen before, hidden in the stone. The door was small, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it, and carved with the same swirling symbols she had seen in the book. Without thinking, Lyra reached out, pressing her hand against the cool stone. The symbols glowed faintly beneath her fingertips, and the door slid open with a soft click, revealing a narrow passage leading downward. Her heart raced. Every instinct told her to turn back, to leave the library and never look behind the door again. But the pull was too strong. The shadows were calling, and something deep inside her was answering. Taking a deep breath, she stepped through the doorway. The passage was dark, lit only by the faint glow of the symbols etched into the walls. As she descended the narrow staircase, the air grew colder, and the weight of the shadows pressed in around her. She could feel the power here, thick and heavy, like the very walls were alive with the essence of the Umbra thread. At the bottom of the stairs, the passage opened into a small chamber. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and on top of it, a black crystal, pulsing with a soft, dark light. Lyra hesitated. The crystal seemed to hum with energy, the same energy she had felt the night before when the shadows had coiled around her. She knew, without a doubt, that this was what she had been drawn to. Carefully, she reached out, her fingers brushing the surface of the crystal. The moment she made contact, the shadows in the room swirled around her, wrapping her in their cold embrace. The air seemed to tremble, and a low voice echoed in her mind. "You found it, now claim it." The crystal pulsed once, and then the darkness overtook her. Chapter 4. The Binding. Lyra awoke to darkness, but it was not the same darkness as before. It felt alive, breathing, as if the very air around her was humming with the presence of unseen forces. For a moment, she couldn't tell where the shadows ended and her body began. It was as if they had become one. Panic shot through her as she struggled to remember what had happened. The crystal, the cold, pulsing light, and then, nothing. She blinked, her eyes adjusting to the dim glow that now illuminated the chamber. The black crystal still rested on the pedestal, but it no longer pulsed. Instead, it seemed to be waiting, dormant, like something had already been taken from it. Lyra pushed herself to her feet, her limbs feeling strangely light, as though she was floating just above the ground. Her hands trembled as she reached for the edge of the pedestal, trying to steady herself. The room was deathly quiet, except for the soft rustle of the shadows moving around her, as if they were curious, testing her, but no longer hostile. What have I done? She took a deep breath, trying to calm the pounding in her chest. The power that coursed through her veins now was unlike anything she had ever felt before. It was cold, but not uncomfortable. A quiet, steady pulse of energy that seemed to thrum just beneath her skin. She flexed her fingers, and to her shock, the shadows responded. They shifted and curled around her hand, bending to her will. Lyra's heart raced. She wasn't just sensing the shadows anymore. She was controlling them. The Umbra thread, the realization hit her hard. The crystal had awakened something inside her, unlocked the potential she hadn't known she possessed. She had heard stories of power like this, but never believed them. The Flame Guild always warned that such forces were forbidden, dangerous, and too wild to control, yet here she was, standing in a hidden chamber deep beneath the guild, wielding the very thing they had sought to suppress. Before she could think further, the shadows whispered again. This time the voice was clearer, sharper. You are bound now. The thread is yours, but so is its burden. The words sent a chill down her spine. Bound? What did that mean? She looked down at her hands again, flexing them as the shadows danced at her fingertips. The power felt intoxicating, but something about the voice's tone made her uneasy. There was a price for this. There had to be. Footsteps echoed down the narrow staircase. Pulling her from her thoughts, Lyra's breath caught. She wasn't alone. She stepped back into the shadows, instinctively blending into the darkness. The skill came to her naturally, as if her body already knew how to move within the shadow's embrace. She pressed herself against the far wall, her heart pounding as the footsteps grew louder. A figure emerged from the stairwell, cloaked in a dark, tattered robe. His face was hidden beneath a hood, but there was something familiar about his presence. The same cold energy that had emanated from the crystal, but far more controlled, far more dangerous. The man stopped in front of the pedestal, his back to her as he surveyed the room. For a moment, Lyra thought she might remain hidden, but then, without turning around, he spoke. I know you're here, Lyra. Her heart froze. How did he know her name? Slowly the man turned, lowering his hood. His face was pale, lined with age and weariness, but his eyes, they were dark, swirling pools of black, as if the shadows had taken root inside him. He smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. You've done well to make it this far, he said, his voice smooth but tinged with an edge that made her skin crawl. I wasn't sure you would find the crystal, but it seems the Umbra thread chose you after all. Lyra stepped out of the shadows, her hands trembling. Who are you? The man's smile widened, though his eyes remained cold. I am Callan, and like you, I am a weaver of shadows. Lyra's mind raced. She had never heard of anyone practicing shadow weaving before, at least not openly. The guilds kept tight control over their domains, and anyone found using forbidden magics was exiled, or worse. Yet here he was, standing before her, calm and collected, as though he belonged in this forgotten chamber. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Callan tilted his head, studying her with those unnerving black eyes. Want? No, Lyra, this isn't about what I want. It's about what you are now. You've touched the Umbra thread, and there's no turning back. Whether you like it or not, you're bound to it. You've unlocked a power that the guilds fear for a reason. I didn't ask for this. She shot back, the fear and frustration bubbling inside her. I didn't choose this power. Callan's smile faded, his expression hardening. No, but the shadows chose you, and now you must decide how to use them. You can either learn to control the Umbra thread, or you will become its slave. The words hit her like a blow. Become its slave? The shadows around her seemed to shift, as if in response to the threat. She clenched her fists, trying to steady her breathing. She had only just begun to understand this power, but already she felt its pull. Strong, seductive, and terrifying. Callan stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low murmur. The guild will hunt you if they find out what you've become. They'll call you a danger, a threat to their order, but there are others like us, Lyra. Others who have embraced the Umbra thread and live in the shadows. We can help you, man! Lyra narrowed her eyes. And what do you get out of this? Why help me? Callan's gaze darkened. Because the world is changing. The guilds have grown complacent, clinging to their power while the true forces of the world stir beneath their feet. The time will come when the shadows rise, and those who control them will decide the future. He reached out a hand, his fingers ghosting over the air between them. Join us, Lyra. Learn to control your power, and you'll never have to fear the guilds, or anyone again. Lyra hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. Everything inside her screamed to reject him, to run, to tell the guild what she'd discovered. But then she felt it. The cold pulse of the Umbra thread, the quiet power coursing through her veins. She couldn't deny it any longer. She was bound to the shadows. Chapter 5. The Offer. Lyra stood frozen, Callan's words still echoing in her mind. She didn't know what to trust, her instincts, or the strange power that was now woven into her very being. The shadows pulsed around her, swirling and whispering, reacting to her thoughts and emotions like a living thing. Callan's outstretched hand hung between them, a promise of power, of control, of safety. But at what cost? I don't trust you, she said, quietly, her voice steady, but edged with uncertainty. The guild has its flaws, but they've protected us for centuries. They teach us control, how to use our powers responsibly. You speak of the Umbra thread like it's some great gift, but all I feel is danger. Callan didn't lower his hand. Instead, he smiled again, a knowing, almost pitying expression. The guild teaches control, yes. But control over what, exactly? Fire, water, air, and earth. They control you. They bind you to the prime threads, keeping you tied to their rigid order, suppressing anything they can't manipulate. He stepped closer, his dark eyes locking onto hers. The Umbra thread isn't dangerous, Lyra. It's freedom. The guilds fear it because they can't bend it to their will. But you... He paused, his gaze intense. You've already felt the shadows respond to you. You can feel the potential, can't you? The power to shape the world in ways they could never teach you. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. He wasn't wrong about one thing. The power she had felt from the shadows was unlike anything she had experienced before. It wasn't just fire, or air, or any of the prime threads. It was something deeper, more fundamental. The shadows didn't just respond to the world around them. They reflected it, distorted it, made it bend in ways she hadn't thought possible. But freedom? No. She could sense the weight of the power she had touched, the risks that came with it. And yet, there was something intoxicating about the way Callan spoke, about the certainty in his voice, the way he described a world outside the guild's control. I don't even know what it means to control the Umbra thread, Lyra said, more to herself than to him. I've barely scratched the surface. That's why I'm here, Callan replied softly, to guide you, to show you what the guilds have hidden from you. Lyra's mind raced. If she followed him, there would be no turning back. She would be marked as a traitor, a threat, but if she didn't, could she really trust the guild to understand what she had become? Could she walk back into their ranks and pretend nothing had changed? The shadows stirred again, gently tugging at the edges of her thoughts. They were urging her to act, to choose. She could feel their impatience, the way they longed to be unleashed. Callan's hand remained steady, his gaze unwavering. Join me, Lyra. You don't have to do this alone. A heavy silence settled between them, broken only by the faint hum of the shadows. Lyra stared at Callan's hand, the offer hanging in the air like a noose around her neck. Could she really trust him? Or was he just another master, another manipulator, cloaked in promises of freedom? She clenched her fists, feeling the cold power coiled within her. There was no going back to the way things were, whether she liked it or not. The shadows had already chosen her. I need time, she said finally, stepping back from Callan's reach. I can't just throw everything away. Callan's smile faded, replaced with a thoughtful frown. He nodded slowly, lowering his hand. I understand. The weight of choice can be heavy, but know this, Lyra. The guild will not give you the time you need. They will hunt you if they learn what you've done. The Umbra thread is a force they will not tolerate. Lyra's heart sank. She knew he was right. If the guilds found out what she had touched, what she had started to unlock, they wouldn't hesitate to strip her of her powers, or worse. But I won't force your hand, Callan continued. Take the time you need. Think it over. But when the time comes to choose, I hope you'll remember that the shadows will always be with you, whether you accept them or not. Without another word, he turned and disappeared into the shadows at the edge of the chamber. Lyra blinked, and he was gone, leaving her alone with the cold, pulsing power that hummed in her veins. She stood there for what felt like hours, staring at the spot where Callan had vanished. The shadows around her felt heavier now, like they were waiting for her to make her move, to take the next step. What am I supposed to do? She pressed her hand against her chest, feeling the steady beat of her heart, the way the shadows seemed to echo its rhythm. She couldn't deny the truth anymore. The Umbra thread was a part of her now. The question was, what would she do with it? Taking a deep breath, she turned and made her way back up the stairs, her mind swirling with thoughts of the guild, Callan, and the strange, dangerous power she now carried. The shadows flickered at her heels, silent and patient. The moment she stepped back into the light of the library, she felt the weight of the world return, but now she was different. The world didn't feel as solid, as certain, as it once had, and neither did she.